What if you could recreate a TV quality character animation entirely in Moho? In this video, I'll show you my full process, designing, rigging, and animating Dougie from Hey Dougie in real time. You'll see exactly how I brought this animation to life, as I step you through my entire process. Plus, I'll share workflow techniques and pro tips I've learned over the years to make the process faster and more professional. I've broken down this video for you into 3 sections: design, rigging, and animation. I've made sure to pack each section with useful techniques and workflow tips to help you create professional quality designs, rigs, and animations in Moho. If you are brand new to Moho and want to learn more, I've linked below each of my Getting Started playlists to best help you learn the basics. If you'd like me to mentor you one-on-one, the link to the waitlist is in the description. Last year was busy, and I can only take on a limited number of students this time as well, so if you're interested, be sure to join the waitlist to get priority when spots open up. Let's get started. In this section, I'm going to walk you through my complete character design workflow, showing you how to quickly and efficiently create characters in Moho. You'll see how I keep my designs perfectly symmetrical, making everything balanced and clean. I'll share a quick way to blend shapes for more complex designs without extra work. Plus, I'll explain why I use strokes instead of shapes for limbs, and how combining strokes creates unique designs. By the end, you'll have a solid, fast workflow for design characters in Moho. Let's get started. All right, so the first thing that I do is I bring in my reference layers, and I have 3 reference layers here. I have that first one hidden, because what I like to do first is just go over the reference with my design. So I'll split my window just to have things a little bit more efficient. So on my left side here, this is where I'm going to be grabbing the colors. On the right side here, this is where I'm going to have the actual reference. The reference layer that I'm going to be designing over, I have it set to a 50% opacity. And both of these layers I have set to ignored by layer selector. So that's just going to be when I'm alt right clicking, I'm quick selecting my layers, it's not accidentally selecting these layers. So let's start with the first layer here. I'm going to name this body. The first thing that I like to do is either take a shape or a design and center it perfectly within the canvas. So I'm just going to go ahead and do that. So I'm going to use my add point tool, and I'm just going to quickly sketch out the points here. Okay. Right now, I don't even need to worry about this being perfect, because what I'm going to do first is I'm going to center this within my canvas so that, number one, I want to clarify you don't have to make anything perfect. I'm going to show you my process in terms of how I get it perfectly symmetrical. Even just having it close enough is totally fine. But because I have a front-facing character, basically a front-facing character, he's turning a little bit to the right, I'm going to aim to have that perfect symmetry. So how I do this is I select my points with my transform points tool, and then I come up here to the position and I center it out, 0, 0. And how I'd be able to see if this is centered is if I hit home on this screen that I have right here, that's going to center my canvas in this window. And if I come down here to this handy little icon or button for the flip canvas, you can see I can flip the canvas back and forth. And the design itself, like I said, is perfectly centered. However, the design is not symmetrical, which is why it looks like it's changing each way that I flip it. So what I like to do from here is I take my reference image, the one that I'm designing over, and I'm actually going to bring it down as close as I can to where that center is that I have. So maybe it's something like this, okay? So again, this isn't exact, but I'm going to be using this for reference to create perfect symmetry. Okay, so now I'm going to go into my next layer. So he's got some clothes on, and right now he's just looking like a potato. So I'm going to throw some clothes on him, and I'm going to just use a mask for this. So I'm just going to draw out a basic rectangle shape. And I'm going to take it, I'm going to grab that color there. Okay, so that's pretty much it for his clothes. He's got his the top part there for his shirt, and then he's got his pants. So let's actually just move that right there. And I'm just going to draw out these pants. And notice too, because this is a mask, I'm not even centering these shapes that I'm drawing right now perfectly in the center. Because honestly, this is the part that matters right here. All of this that's happening outside, that doesn't really matter. And you're going to see here in a second what that would look like. So I'm going to change that fill for his pants. And then I'm going to put both of these inside of a group. And right now I'm not going to worry about naming my groups. I will name these as I kind of finalize everything. But as I'm starting out, it's kind of difficult to keep track of everything. So I'm just going to create the mask right now by double clicking on the group layer, go to mask, and then I'm going to set this to hide all. And what that means essentially is anything that's not inside of the body will be hidden. So the clothes, because they're outside of the body, or these parts are outside of the mask, which is the body, they will be hidden. And then Moho automatically sets this to mask this layer, which is exactly what we want. We want the clothes layer to be masked by the body. And again, I'll toggle off my reference so we can see there. That's what that's looking like. Now, before I get too far with the rest of his body, I'm actually going to go back to his head, and I'm just going to get one side as good as I can get it. Okay, so maybe something like that. Then what I do is I go and I delete, using D on the keyboard for the delete edge. I go ahead and I delete all of those edges for the character. The one thing that I want to make sure that I have centered, if I'm trying to do a perfect symmetrical character, which I am in this case, is I want these points to be centered. So I'm going to go to this point here, and on my x-axis, I'm just going to zero that out. So that was actually pretty close to center as it was. Okay, so that looks pretty good. And then again, I'm just going to come in here with any refining that I want to do, something like that. So that looks good. So now I'm going to hit Control C, Control V, and I'm just going to paste it exactly where it's at. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to come in here to the X axis, because right now this is perfectly centered. I'm just going to remove the negative from this value, and that's going to push it to that other side. Now from here, I can flip it, and now I have these points lining up exactly in the center. Now, the one thing that I've struggled to get to work is the welding. If I have it in place like this, it doesn't seem to weld. It seems that it wants you to first select the point and then drag it over and then weld it. So now I should have pretty close to an exactly symmetrical shape here. One thing that I'm going to fix though right here is this curve. It's not looking too great. So I'm going to come here and I'm going to hit peak, and then I'm going to hit smooth. And then I'm just going to smooth that out. And that just makes sure that those handles are symmetrical on both sides, since everything else is, because I just copied and pasted it. So I'm going to do the same thing here. I'm going to go peak, and then I'm going to go smooth, and I'm just going to smooth that out. Okay, so I'm going to hit home on my keyboard, and then I'm just going to flip that. And let's take out the reference there so we can actually see it. So you can see, besides this part down here, which looks like it's not a perfect square, that's the close, everything else is exactly symmetrical. And the one thing that I'm noticing is it looks like the color is a little off. So I'm just going to go back and just make sure I'm grabbing the right colors there. Okay, the next part I'm going to do is the collar and the tie. Okay, so this is going to be the same thing. This is just going to be a square. And again, just line that up somewhat as best I can. And then from here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to split these points here using the select points tool. I'm going to come up here to split. And that's going to put that exactly in the middle. So this point should be, and it looks like it's a little off, I can move it over to 0. And I'm going to do the same thing for the top. I'm just going to split that, and I'm going to move that point over to 0. Because what we're going to do is we're going to add a bone that lets the body tilt up and down. So as he's tilting, the perspective is changing. So this collar will be moving in perspective. So I'm actually going to add some curvature to this, so that when it bends up and bends down, it bends just like that. Now the next part is for this tie. This is just a technique that I use, that I just kind of figured as I was trying to figure out how to do these shapes more efficiently. The liquid shapes actually really help out with this. First, I'm going to just turn off the masking here so I can draw outside of this. And I'm going to draw out my shape roughly. First, just right here. There we go. There's my shape. I'm just going to move this out, and then I'm going to change the color. And then what I'm going to do is on top of this shape, I'm going to draw out pretty much the same shape, just right on top. And then I'm going to select that shape. So again, this is part of the blending feature that I'm showing on Liquid Mask. This is just a shortcut to create this shape. That's all I'm doing. I'm going to select that top shape that I just drew right on top of it, and I'm going to set it to add. And then from here, what it's going to do, once I have that added to that shape, is I'm going to use this blend option to just kind of blend my shape that I want. Because like I said, Moho's kind of doing it for me right there. So I like how that looks at too. And then what I do, I then just take and I merge this shape. So now that shape that I just created is going to be merged. And there we go. We have all the points for that shape. It doesn't create a perfect shape, but it does save a lot of time. And if I need to make any tweaks, it's really easy to do. Now from here, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to center this on the x-axis. So just like that. So again, I'm thinking of the symmetry. Everything on this character isn't symmetrical. I'm just using it as reference. The next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to draw out this this tie, and I'm going to split the shape down there. I'm going to bring that down, and I'm just going to update that color to match. Okay, so that looks good. Let's go ahead and let's center it out. And I'm just going to use my select shape tool and just bring that up top. Okay, then I'm going to hide my reference layer. So again, I can see what's going on. I can see that, okay, I need to make that the right color. And there we go. So far that's coming along pretty good. The only thing that I'm looking at here that could probably be a little bit better would have been this head. But I think the ears are going to cover that. Again, if I flip it, that still is looking nearly identical on both sides. Okay, cool. So now I have the body and I have the collar and the tie. Let's put that back inside of its mask. So that's mask. And then let's go ahead and let's do his badges that are just right on top of his body there. And this is pretty simple. These are actually just some shapes. So I'm just going to speed this part up. Okay, there we go. So now we got his badges drawn out. And it looks like didn't grab that color, so I'm going to grab that color. I'm just going to take these shapes, hit tab to select all of the points for half selected shapes, and just kind of move it over like that. So that's more or less centered within my design there. It looks pretty good. Next, we're going to do the face. So I'm going to go ahead and put that on top of the body. I'm just going to call this face. And that'll be for his eyes and his mouth and nose. So I'm just going to use, again, just some simple shapes here. I'm going to speed this process up. Okay, cool. So now from here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to select all of these points, and I'm going to do the same thing as before. I'm just going to center that perfectly at 0 there. Now this is where things will start getting a little offset, as you can see there, just because the design itself isn't symmetrical, and that's perfect because that matches the original character design. Okay, from there, I'm going to draw the ears. So the ears is going to be behind everything. And they are not going to need to be inside of that mask. So I'm just going to remove them from the mask by saying don't mask that layer. And then I'm going to separate these because I want to have a head turn to where his ear goes behind and in front of his body. So I'll first start with just the left ear. So I'm going to pull up my reference again. I'm just going to draw this out. And one thing that I'm keeping in mind is that I'm having the points at least have the same number of points on both sides. This is obviously going to help with your ear bends when the ear itself is bending. To have the same amount of points on both sides is really going to help this. Okay. And I think it already made it that color. So that is perfect. And then what I'm going to do is I'm wanting to now make this symmetrical on the other side. So I'm just going to hide my reference just so I can see what my design is looking like and just kind of refine it by eye here. And yeah, that looks pretty good to me. So now what I'm going to do is instead of duplicating this layer, I'm just going to create a new vector layer. Make sure it's not masked. I'm going to call this ear right. Me personally, I actually don't really like to duplicate layers and then flip them because it kind of causes more issues for me down the road when I'm wanting to move my designs around. I'm actually moving the whole origin of the layer, which for me personally, I don't recommend doing. And this is probably the most efficient way for me that I've figured out in terms of design. So what I do is copy and paste those points. And then what I do is take these points themselves. And on the x-axis, I'm going to make it positive and I'm going to flip it. So there we go. So we still have that symmetry on both sides with his ears there. Now, what the original design has is some gradient behind so that you can see the difference between the ears and the body. When I was setting this up, I did have a lot of masks and things like that. And unfortunately, what it started to do was cause display issues to where it would render fine like it is now, but you couldn't see what it was that I was doing. So an alternative and workaround that I found for this was to put his ears on a gradient And again, I'm going to bring back my reference layer to grab those colors. So I have the original color, and I'm going to click on this black over here, and I'm just going to update that color and bring down this gradient. Okay, so now you can see, let me remove my reference here. So now you can see that there is a some separation between that ear and the front there. And I can move this gradient wherever I want, so I can make that more exaggerated. And let's say that looks good there. So what I like to do from here is I like to just push this style that I'm using onto my other ear. And I can do this with the select shape tool. So if I select the right ear shape, so Alt right click, and I select it, and if I hold down Control and left click, you can see that it's going to push that style to my next ear. Now I didn't do it perfectly, but at least it brought the gradient over, which saves some time. And then from there, I can just kind of match it up to what kind of looks good there. Man, now that I'm seeing it, this character, it looks like a wiener. It's kind of not a good design in that case for a kid's show. Okay, so now what I'm gonna do is I am going to do the arms and the legs. So this is actually one thing that I like to do as often as I can is make the limbs as strokes, because strokes have so much flexibility. And I'll show you my method in terms of what I do for this. So I'm going to have the arms below, on top of the clothes and below the collar and tie. I'm going to start out with my arm left. So not the character's left, but my left. That's always how I've done it. So now I am going to take this layer and I'm not going to mask it because everything is going to be going outside of the mask in a second here. So the arm, what I'll do is I'll just take and I'll draw a simple stroke. And I'll try to center that best I can to what's there on the artwork. I'm going to split it so I can have like my elbow. And then I'm going to split it. Actually, you know what? I'm going to bring this part up to kind of where his wrist is. And I'm just going to create the stroke shape just based off of, you know, the thickness of this arm right there. So the thickness that I'm going to use for the width of the stroke is going to be 100. I need to make sure that's a stroke. My thickness is set to 100. Create shape. 100 is looking really thick. What the heck? I'm actually going to shrink down that size. Okay, so I'm going to leave it at that size there. Now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to rotate this arm out, and I'm just going to move it roughly to right about there. And I'm just going to move the reference out of the way because now I need to be able to do this myself. So if your stroke doesn't look like this, this is probably because you have round caps on. So you're going to come up here to advance and you're going to turn your round caps off. Now what I'm going to do from here is I'm going to draw out another stroke connecting to this stroke. So I'm going to have two separate strokes. So I'm going to select these 2 points with my create shape tool, and I'm going to come up here to create shape with the stroke on. Then I'm going to go to round caps, and what this is going to do is it's going to round that edge, and then I'm going to, because this is a stroke, I'm going to grab that eyedropper for the stroke and grab that stroke color. Now right now that shape is on top of the other stroke, so I'm going to move it beneath. And then I'm going to take this top point and I'm just going to move it down. And if you move it too far too close to the other point, it's going to start to bend. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to turn on this option here, the fixed Bezier handle. Let's see if that lets me get in a little bit closer there. There it does. So that's roughly what I want to match that shape there. I could actually just pull it out just a little bit. So something like that looks pretty good. Okay. And again, this is just my workaround to achieve that shape. And then from here, I should be able to just turn that back off and that should be fine. Okay. So now I have, let's go ahead and let's go to home again. Let's flip this. Yeah, it looks pretty good. So now just like before, I'm going to just create a new layer. I'm not going to duplicate it. I'll just call this arm right. And I'm going to take everything that I've created so far and I'm going to hit Control C, Control V. I'm going to move it over to the opposite side and I'm going to flip it. That's odd. Okay, so it looks like it removed my stroke. I'm going to add my stroke back in. Set it back to the same width, which is Oh, I see what happened. It's doing a mask. Okay, so I created the new vector layer and it made it into a mask. Oh, I need to remove my mask. There we go. And now I can take that shape and I can flip it. And that should be identical to the other side there. Cool. And last we got his legs. So I'm going to do kind of the same type of thing here. So I'm actually just going to grab this shape and I'm going to put that layer below his body. So this is going to be his leg left. Uncheck that to give me more space. And I'm going to go to don't mask this layer. And I'm just going to, let's go back to that shape, Control C, go to the leg, Control V, and I'm going to just rotate this since this is pretty close to the same shape that I'll need, okay? And then from here, I'm going to use my reference again, and I'm just going to move this into place. And obviously there's a lot less to do here, so I'm just going to shrink that down. I definitely want to make sure I still have my knee in there, so I'm just going to move that point like that. Move these up. Okay, so what I definitely need to do is shrink down this stroke size because it's really messing me up here. So I'm going to shrink that down to roughly where it needs to be. Then select all those points and move those into place. Okay, so the leg or the shape of this foot obviously doesn't match exactly because that's kind of the, not the shortcoming of strokes, but you know, just this method that I'm using as far as the stroke method for my limbs. I'm not gonna be able to get it exact, but what I can do is I can do the same thing. I can take my leg there, and I can turn on the fixed Bezier handle and move that in closer. I think that is probably as good as I can get it. Yeah, I think that looks okay. Again, it's not identical to the design, but that's just because I'm using the limitation of a stroke. So now I'm going to do the same thing. I'm just going to add a new layer, make sure it's not masked. Call that my leg right. And I'm going to take those points, paste them, and I'm just going to remove the negative so that it flips it perfectly onto the other side. And there we go. Now if I did everything correctly, yeah, the design is perfectly symmetrical. So yeah, from there, what I would do then is I would just come in here and I'd name whatever the character's name. And now it is all ready to rig. So we'll do that next. If you're liking the video so far or have suggestions for other Moho tutorials you'd like me to cover, let me know in the comments. In this section, I'll walk you through my complete rigging workflow, showing you how to rig characters in Moho quickly and efficiently. First, I'll show you my technique for making all points visible while adding bones, making rigging easier. Next, you'll see how to set up and rig a Vitruvian bone for dynamic poses. Then, I'll explain my binding method. Spoiler, it's all link bone binding. After that, I'll share my approach to testing rigs without using frame 0. Finally, I'll show you how to add smart bone dials for body turns, body tilts, and facial movements. By the end, you'll have a fast and reliable workflow for rigging characters in Moho. Let's get started. So I'm going to change my folder from a group folder into a bone. And then I'm going to come here to my display and I'm going to turn off my fill and my stroke. When I go to add a bone, I can now see all of my points. So this can actually give me really good reference in terms of where I could place my bone to have the best joint movement with my rig. So what I like to do is what I do before is I just take and I center my root bone on the x-axis. And let's see, I'm just going to move it to right about there. And then just like all the other rigging videos that you've seen or that I've done, we're just going to start rigging. And I'll just kind of explain my process along the way. So I have my head there. I'm going to rig the points in the ears, looking at where the joints are, where those bones are, making sure that it bends at those joints. And then I like to create a face bone. That's just going to be what all the face assets are tied to. So the eyes, nose, mouth. And then I'm just going to come down here and I'm going to create my bone for the arm. So I'm just going to give it 2 bones and I'm just going to have the hand attached to that. I'm going to do the same thing over here. And then for the legs, I'm going to attach those to my root bone. And there we go. So I think that is everything as far as the rigging goes. So I'm just going to turn my fill and stroke back on. Hey, this is McCoy from the future. Okay, so as I'm editing this video, I realized that there was a pretty vital part that I wanted to teach that I completely skipped over. And that is how to make a perfectly symmetrical bone structure. So what I just went through with adding bones, that's typically how I would do it in most cases. However, if I was wanting to do a TV quality type rig, then it's going to need to be symmetrical whenever possible. I'll show you what this looks like currently. So when I just created these bones, as you can see here, when I added these two bones, they're at different heights. And what that does is that causes your rotation. When I rotate the bone out from here to here, they're going to be rotating at different distances because of where that rotation point is on that shape. So there it's up higher, whereas there it's down lower. So that one's obviously going to move up higher from that pivot point. Same thing with the arms. And I noticed this too when I got into animation with the arms in the later in the video, that the arms weren't the same. So right now when I go to rotate the arms down, I'm just going to go to a frame here so I can just move these down. You can see, using this bottom of my screen as the reference, you can see that the arms are not the same length. Even though the design is symmetrical, the arms, because of where I place those bones, are not. And then the other thing too is angles. Angles are really hard, obviously, to get exactly right if you're just, freehand. If I'm just going from one side to the other, maybe I can get my positioning right, even though that's not right, but my angle's now going to be wrong. So there's a lot of things to take into account when you're trying to create a symmetrical bone structure for your rig. So what we're going to do is we're going to do something similar to what we did with the design. We're going to just add the bones to the one side where we want them, and then we'll duplicate that and move it to the other. But the process is a little bit more confusing. So I hope that this makes sense, because it can get a little complicated. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete the right side bones. And for this example, I'm just going to show you how to do the ear and the arm, and then you'll have an idea of what to do for the leg. Okay, so we know that bones have parenting. So the ears, they are the children of the head bone. So if I was to flip the head bone, the children will flip with it. Also, the other bone that is child of the head bone is the face bone there. So in order to create perfect rig, the first thing that I had to do is I had to create my root bone exactly at X, which is the part that I did right. The rest of it, I just went on autopilot because I've recorded this video so many times I lost track of what I was doing. So right here, all of these bones going up the head, these are centered perfectly within the X axis. So the horizontal axis, they're exactly in the center. So that means whenever I do flip this bone to that other side, it will always be mirrored to what was on the one side. And because I have a symmetrical design, that is actually the other part to it. Your design itself also has to be symmetrical. So not only do your bones have to be symmetrical, but so does the design itself. That's the only way that this would work. That goes for your point placement, everything. So again, it's a little bit more involved process, but in the end, if you're trying to go for the perfect rig, even though I still don't believe there's such a thing, this is as close as you can get to it. Okay, so now let me show you the process. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to the bone layer on frame 0, and I'm going to select these two bones with the select bone tool, and I'm going to hit Control C and Control V. Now what just happened is I created the exact same bone structure as the existing bone structure. So this copied bone that I just created, it is still parented to this head bone. Now, the part that's hard to see is if I hit P on the keyboard to see the parenting, you're not going to be able to see it because the two bones are on top of each other. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select the parent of these two bones, and I'm going to unparent it. So I'm going to use my mouse so you don't miss any of the shortcuts. Actually, let me turn my keyboard shortcuts on. So I have my keyboard shortcuts on, but I'm going to do this all from the menu here so you can see exactly what I'm doing, because this is the part where it gets confusing. I'm going to go back to my bone parenting, reparent bone tool. So now I know that that's selected, that bone is selected, and I'm just going to click off. Now you can't see it because this arrow is in the way, but there's another arrow underneath of it that just was unparented. So these two bones right here were just unparented from the head bone. So now what happens is when I click on this bone and I flip it, the unparented bone stays and the parented bone flipped to the other side. Now, I want to be able to flip this parent back. So this head bone, I want to flip it back because now look, I have my face bone. And when you get later into a parent of multiple children, you want to make sure that you flip back those parents back to where they were before. Okay, so I'm going to do that. But before I do that, I have to unparent this bone. So I'm going to select that bone and go to the parent bone tool, and I'm going to click off of it. And then I'm going to select this bone, which is Alt and then left click. I'm going to select that parent, hit T on the keyboard, and then I'm going to flip it back. So as you can see there, that stayed where it's at. And that's how you get a perfect symmetrical bone structure. And then the last part's pretty easy. You're just going to take those two bones. I'm going to go back to the reparent, and I'm going to parent them back to the head. Okay? So I'm going to do this a little bit faster, this time without the menu items. I'm just going to use the keyboard shortcuts so you can see how fast this can be. So this bone right here is the parent to all of these bones, including the arm bone. So when I flip it, do the side flip, look at what's happening. So that's why it's really important to flip it back. Okay, so again, just hit P on the keyboard. So there's the parenting structure right there. All right, so I'm going to select these two bones. I'm going to hit Control C, Control V. So they are now duplicated. Both of those duplicates are still parented to the body bone. I'm going to deselect. I'm going to select the bone, hit my bone parent, click off. Can't see it, but it's unparenting that one set of bones. Hit escape. So many keyboard shortcuts. I'm going to select the body bone, hit T, and then I'm going to flip it. And again, it flipped it up here, but that's okay because that's already, that doesn't matter. This bone right here, it's exactly mirrored to this side of that bone. Okay. So before I flip it, I got to make sure I unparent it, or else it's just going to flip back when I flip this parent back. And then I'm going to flip the bone back. And there we go. Everything's back to where it is. And then I take these two bones. Bada bing. Bada boom. I totally missed my keyboard shortcut. Dang, I messed it up. All right. So there you go. That's how you do that. So now when I go to my bone parenting, I can verify everything is where it is. And like I said, ignore the target bone because I don't think we've done a target bone yet in this part of the video. It's the same thing for the leg. So this would be the parent in this case. I'll just highlight this. This would be the parent. So this is what I'm going to be flipping. Boop, back and forth. Okay? So that's it. I just wanted to show you this part. I can't believe I forgot it. I'm totally bummed that I did, but here's the beauty of editing. I could just edit it in and hopefully it still makes sense. All right, back to the video. I need to create that other arm position. So I have a reference for what it is that I'm trying to do, which is this right here. So he's just gonna have his arm go up. I'm gonna do the same thing. Right now I don't have anything bound, which is perfect. So I'm gonna create a new layer and I'm gonna call this arm left. I'm just gonna call this arm point and then left, okay? And then I'm going to not mask that layer. And then again, I'm just gonna copy that, paste it, and I'm just gonna use kind of that same shape. It's pretty straightforward, but I'm just going to use that to pull his arm up and out. So just going to fix that point there. Again, this part doesn't really have to be perfect. I'm actually going to delete that stroke because I don't need it. I'm actually going to create my own shape and I'm going to hide that arm below so I could see kind of the negative space there that it's making up on that arm. So it looks like it's a little bit closer to his ear. Just something like that will work. Okay, and then same thing for his hand there. I'm just going to kind of do the same all on one layer. I'm just going to do that method I showed you before. Just take another shape, drag it on top, add it, blend it. Let's actually give it a little bit better of a shape there so it matches something like that. And yeah, so not quite an oval, but I don't know. That's actually kind of old. This is a very After Effects type shape. That almost looks like something we could do with a stroke. But again, it doesn't have to be perfect. So I'm just going to go ahead. I'm going to merge that, use that shape, drag that down, probably just shrink that down a little big. And there we go. Looks like it's just set to the side a little bit there. Yeah. So again, the spacing, it's not exactly the same. My stroke is kind of crinkling there in the middle. It's not quite that smooth stroke that I would want, but that's close enough for me. And then I'm going to come in here and create my next shape, which is going to be my finger. I could add joints if I wanted to give it some additional movement, but this is a pretty simple animation, so I'm not going to worry about that. Okay, that looks pretty good. Obviously, you can definitely get a lot more finer detail, but again, that's not too big of a deal. So now we have this. This is going to be part of our Vitruvian bones. Let's go ahead and let's add bones for that limb that we just created. So I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to select that waist there, the torso, and I'm going to turn on just my strokes again so I can see that. So make sure that that's the parent. I'm going to drag that out. Roughly, it doesn't have to be perfect, roughly to where it needs to be there. And then I'll create another bone there for his hand. Okay, turn on my fill and stroke. Cool. So now we can create a Vitruvian bone with that. Turn the other arm on. Okay, so now I start binding. So what I talked about in my best binding method for Moho rigs tutorial, I usually do about 90% is link bone binding, and then that remaining 10 to 5%, that's going to be layer binding or point binding. So that's the first thing I always start with. So for the badge there, I'm just going to link it to the bone that it's closest to. I don't want this head bone to be affecting, the badge movement. So what I like to do is create a rigging test space for all of my rigs, and it'll happen before the animation. So I'm going to set my animation start time on frame 24, and everything in between frame 24 and 0, that's where we're going to do all my testing and do different setups for my character. So I'm going to do Alt left click on frame 24, and that's going to make it so that's going to be the start. And then on all these frames here, this is where I'm going to do my testing for this rig. So I'm just going to come here to frame 6 to just start building out my tests, what I want to do. And what we can do is we can start with that. We can start with like the head there. So I now know that the badges, those are going to move with the body, but I want them to be unaffected by the head. So let's just go ahead and let's just kind of do some different things here to kind of get that, to get all those bones moving, because we'll be able to come back here and see how things are attaching. So I'm going to go back to my frame 0. And let's do the same thing for the collar and the tie. Let's go ahead and let's just bind it to the bone that it's closest to, which is going to be that torso there. The arm, my right arm here, I'm going to tie it to, or bind it to that bone there. So it's a pretty straightforward process. I won't fast forward it just in case there's anything that, somebody's watching that they don't want me to skip through. Like I said, it's pretty straightforward. For the clothes, that's just the bottom part there as well. So I'm just going to bind it to that bone. For the face, I like to have all the face layers and shapes bound to a bone. This really helps for head turns. But in this case, it's all on one layer and I get the best results. So I'm just going to go ahead and just bind that by the layer. For the body, that's going to contain the whole potato shape there. So I'm just going to bind those two bones to that. The legs, I'm going to do the same thing. Link bone binding. And then the ears, we'll do the same thing. Just do good old link bone binding. Now from here, if I go to frame 6, I can now see, okay, now things are a little wonky. Everything is bound, as I can see there. The ears are looking pretty good. And I just kind of look at everything in isolation, just looking at each thing for what it is. The face, everything's attached there. The body movement, that needs some improvement there. There's a lot of influence happening on both sides of that body. Arms looking good. Both arms are looking good. It looks like my clothes, for some reason, isn't bound, or maybe bound to something else. I don't know what that result is, so we'll see what's going on there. The legs are pretty much useless because the bone strength is probably fighting itself. So let's go back to frame 0, and I'm going to hit Control-Shift-D for the shortcut to bring me back. And what's probably happening here is the bone strength with my link bone binding is probably fighting itself for a lot of these different parts, especially the legs. If I was to bend the leg, there's so much strength on these bones that it doesn't know what I want to do with this leg. And because these are strokes, this should be a pretty easy fix. So I'm just going to reduce the strength for both of those. And there we go. Now we got a pretty good looking leg there. I'm going to do the same thing. Just create that bend with the manipulate points tool, or the manipulate bones tool, and then just fix the strength. So Z and S. Okay, so that looks pretty good. For the arms, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm just going to put them into a position, and that looks pretty good. Again, anything that I need to make adjustments to, I can definitely do that. I don't think I bound the clothes to anything. Wow, I actually bound them to that bone. So with this clothes layer selected, I'm just going to select this bone and hit link bone. They were accidentally bound to that arm bone as well. So I'm going to do the same thing. Whoops. So you need to be on the bone group layer in order to do the manipulate bones tool and bone strength adjustment. There we go. Do the same thing for this one as well. I could either give it a lot more strength, but then it's kind of fighting with the bone strength of the other ones, or I could just point bind it. However, I'm going to hold off on doing any of the point binding for the arms because Vitruvian bones do not like point binding. They work going off of flexi-binding or link bone binding. But once you have them set up, then you can change the rigging method. So I'll just leave that how it is for now. Okay, so now if we go to frame 6, cool. Now things are looking a lot better. He's got a third arm there. He's got his little itty bitty arms right there off to the side. His ears are working good. His legs are working good. Now let's go ahead and add some target bones so we can anchor his feet down to the ground with something. So without any bones selected, I'm hitting escape. I'm just gonna add my 2 target bones. Those are really long target bones, but we'll work with it. And then I'm gonna go to my parent bone tool, use the keyboard shortcut, hold down Alt and then Control, Alt and then Control. And there we go. So now we got him moving around. That looks better. If we want, I don't have it for this character, but if we want, we could add some IK stretch to those legs just by coming here and doing some IK stretching. And we'll go ahead and do that because I do like to have that on a lot of my characters, that additional stretch. And then I'll just take the strength off the target bones. And I think we're pretty much all set up. Check that out, he's dancing. I think we're pretty much all set up for our animation. The last thing that we'll do is we're gonna set these 2 bones as a Vitruvian bone. So I'm gonna select this bone and this bone. So it's important to select the 2 parents of the bones that we wanna create into Vitruvian bones. And obviously I've created tutorials on this, Moho has tutorials on this. So if you need more, you can look into that. But then I'm going to come over to the Vitruvian bones icon here, and I'm going to select group. And then to switch between those 2 bones, I'm just going to use the keyboard shortcut, Alt-C, Alt-V, or Alt-D, and that'll just switch between those. You can see here on my layer panel that they're switching. And there we go. I think we're pretty much ready now to go into... I'm having a result here that I don't know why. Looks like I have these parented. I do. Okay. So just because I caught this really quick, I'm just going to show you that when I was moving these legs, they were moving together. And that's just because I accidentally had them parented. Target bones don't need any parenting unless you are intentionally parenting them for something. But in this case, they don't need to be parented. So I'm going to select this bone here and just click off, and that'll remove that parent. Now I'm going to start creating the smart bone dials. So I'll start off by first selecting the parent, and then I'm going to go above his head, and I'm going to add his, call it body turn. I'm going to turn on the label so you can see what that's labeled. And then I'm going to create a body tilt, and then I'm going to create a squash and stretch. And then on the left side of his face, I'll have my blink. And then last, I'm going to create my smile frown. Okay, so I'm going to start with the body turn. So I'm going to have my bone group layer selected. I'm going to have my actions. If you don't see this, you can go to actions, docking, actions if you want it docked. I'm going to create my new action, and it's going to be for that body turn. If my timeline is blue, that lets me know that I'm in my smart bone action. If it's red, that means that you don't have any bones selected and you're just in an animation action. So I'm in the right place. I'm going to go to frame 24. And I'm just going to have his body turn just the one way. And that's as far as I need that bone to go. Even though I have my keyframe interpolation set to linear, it still creates it as smooth. So I have a keyboard shortcut, Control-Shift-A, which you could set here in your edit keyboard shortcuts. That's going to be to select all the keys on the timeline. And then Control-1 is the keyboard shortcut for setting all of your keys to linear. So that's just going to make sure that that bone stays at a constant rate when it's rotating. And then I'm just going to come here to the bones now. And I'm going to move those over. I'm going to leave that bone where it's at. I'm going to go to frame 12 And I'll actually just have it rotate a little bit further from the head there. And then it'll come back to that original position. I'll just hit reset on my transform bone. So I'll have this. So that looks pretty good. That sells it enough that there is a head turn going on there. And then for the collar and tie, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to have my visual reference here as far as where it's at. So it's positioned directly underneath of his chin there. I'm going to turn off my points just so I could see this a little bit better. And I'm going to move that roughly to the same position. Okay. Even though my keys show that they're linear, I could tell by how this tie is moving that it's doing like a slow out and then moving. So it still, for some reason, has a smooth interpolation. So I'm going to hit Control A, Control 1, and there we go. Now I have a linear interpolation. I'm going to do the same thing for the badges. I'm going to make sure they're all selected. And they are. I just hit Control A. I just like to have that not visible while I'm doing this. And this is a very simplified body turn. If I was doing things in perspective, I would want to keep those things in mind. Right now, I'm just doing a basic translation from one side to the other. And then again, I'm just looking at that negative space to make sure it's matching here. I'm using Control-Shift-D just to pop between those two keys. So I can go a little bit closer. And then again, I could tell that even though visually it's showing me that I have my linear interpolation, it's not, because it's just not working. So I'm gonna hit Control-Shift-A, Control 1. So now that is linear. And there we go. That looks pretty good. Again, if you wanted to go into more detail, fix the perspective and things like that. But to sell the illusion that this is a head turn, that works pretty good. Now I am noticing that I'm losing my gradient when the head turns. And I believe, yes, my gradients are not following my ears, which is odd. I do have them flexi-bound or link bone binding bound, but they're not moving with it. So I'm going to try one more thing, and that's going to be color points to add those gradients. Color points are great because you can attach the color to the actual points of the shape, whereas gradients are more like an image. So they need bone strength to move, and they aren't moving. So I'm going to remove that gradient by coming here to this gradient dropdown and setting it back to plane. I'm going to do the same thing for the other side. Okay, so I was able to solve this off camera. I'm going to show you what's happening right now. So when I use my color points, and I need to turn my points back on so I can actually see the points, and I set my point to clear, and then I go to set a color, they disappear. However, they do render. And that's not helpful to you because obviously you need to be able to see what I'm doing. So I'm going to hit Control-Z. And what I found out is, I don't want to assume this is a bug, but right now I have my whole bone group layer inside of a mask, and my ear left and ear right is inside of that mask. And it really doesn't need to be. Technically, what I could do is I could put these layers inside of a group. I can mask that group. So what I'm actually going to do first is I'm going to remove the mask from the bone group layer. And there you go. You can see that it's out. There's no mask created for that body. I need a mask so I can put all those layers into that body. So I'm going to right click and I'm going to go to group mask, mask inside bottom layer. So now that's working like it should. And I'm just going to call this group body. And now that I've done that, if I go back to my ear and I hit K on the keyboard for my color points, and if I go to set that point color now, it's now working. So all these points are set at a strength of 1. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to select these 2 points here. So what I'm doing is holding down Control to use the box select to select multiple points. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to come in here to the color, and I'm just going to make it a little bit more red, keep it pretty saturated, and just create that gradient. I can adjust the strength of this gradient by left clicking and dragging, and you can see up here that it's changing my values. So I'm just going to set this to a strength value of 2. And I'm going to hit Control-I just to invert those points just to make sure those are set to 1, and they are. So now I'm going to do the same thing on the other side so I could replicate this pretty easily. So I'm going to select those points, select the color, set that to a strength of 2, invert my points, and just make sure that they're set to a strength of 1 with that body color selected. So now I should have these color points follow the head in the body turn. So I'm going to go back to home, go back to my main bone group layer, go to actions, go back to body turn, and perfect. Now it's working. Now from the reference where I've grabbed this character, the head turn actually looks like this, like that. Obviously the bone doesn't swing, but as far as the end head turn, it kind of has the shape, and the ear is still behind the head. But I want to make it a little bit more different for this head turn, so it's a little bit more obvious. So I'm going to move his ear above his body at frame, let's see, like frame 15. Now, in order for me to do this, I first need to change this group layer into an animated layer order. So with that group layer selected, I'm going to check this on and hit apply. And what this is going to do is going to show me that this is now ready to be animated, these layer orders. So I'm going to move that ear now on top of the body layer. And then what I'll do is I'll just select this layer here for the ear, and I'll just shrink it down just a little bit, just so it's not on top of his muzzle there. So something like that. And the same thing, I just need to make sure that I'm creating the correct keyframe interpolation, which is linear for all my keys, so that they all move at the same rate. And that looks good. If I turn it slowly, obviously there's some issues there, but it's going to be a fast head turn. So that's what it'll look like. Cool. So that is the body turn. And now we're going to do the body tilt. So now I'm just going to select that bone, go into my bone action. And this is going to have two separate actions. It's going to have one going up for the body tilt going up, and it's going to have one going down for the body tilt going down. So I'll start with the first one going up. Same thing. Control Shift A, Control 1, just make sure all those are keying properly. And then I'm just going to move the face up, the ears down, and let's do the head. We'll do the head down. Maybe move these points in just a tad. Let's just see if that gives us the illusion of yes. So that kind of looks like he has like his head going up. So what I need to make sure is that all of those are keyed with the linear interpolation. And then I'm going to do the same thing for the collar. So I want to create that perspective change. So I'm going to move the tie up. So something like that. And then I'm going to go into the close, and I'm just going to move that up. And then for this bottom part of the close here, I'm just going to move that up. So it should look like that. Yeah, I could tell there is not linear interpolation on a lot of these parts here. So I'm just going to really quickly go through, just make sure that all of those have linear keys set. I don't know why I'm getting this result to where I have to do it for every single one. Possible that I could be doing something wrong on my end. So that looks a lot better. Everything looks like it's moving at the same rate of speed. And last, I'm just going to move these badges up. Again, I can tell that it's not moving linearly, so I'm going to hit Control Shift A, Control 1. Luckily, I had those keyboard shortcuts set up because that would take a lot of effort to manually click through. Okay, so that looks pretty good. I think the one thing I am going to do, though, is I'm just going to move his arms up a little bit. So I'm just going to select those parent bones for those arms, hit Shift, and just drag those up. Control Shift A, Control 1. And then I need to remember that I do have a Vitruvian bone. And in order to see that Vitruvian bone, I need to go back to frame 0, go back to my bone group, hit Control D to switch to that. I'm on frame 0, so I'm not creating a keyframe for that Vitruvian bone switch, since those are keyframeable in your smart bone dial, which is cool. But in this case, I just need it so that I can move the arm up. So I'm going to hit Control A, Shift A, Control 1. And there we go. So now we have some depth to this character a little bit. Okay. And now I'm going to do the same thing, but for the body tilt going down. So I'm going to go my main line, select the body tilt, go to a new action. It's going to create body tilt 2, hit OK. I'm going to move that down. And obviously I need to move that to frame 24. Control Shift A, Control 1. And we're going to do the same thing going down. So the face is going to go down, probably not that far. Yeah, let's go far. It's actually better to exaggerate what you want in your smart bone dial, and then you can do the finer control with the dial itself. So that's actually the cool thing about smart bone dials. You can exaggerate it quite a bit. If he's bending down, I would imagine that his head is probably going to grow a little bit because now you're seeing the back of his head. Let's see what that looks like. Yeah, it looks a little bit better. Again, I'm forgetting to make these linear. And then same thing. So everything is now going to be going the opposite direction. So now for the tie, it's going to be going down. Just make sure I'm matching that right. Okay, I'm going to hit Control-Shift-A, Control-1, just so I can see this better. Okay, that looks pretty good. For the badges, I'm going to do the same thing. Just going to move those down. Hit Control-Shift-D. I'm just going to check that spacing. Okay, I can go down a little bit more. On my timeline, Control-Shift-A, Control-1. For the clothes, so for this pants right here, I'm going to move that down. Control-Shift-A, Control-1. Okay, so that's looking pretty good. And then obviously the last thing is going to be for his arms. So the arm goes down like that. And the other arm as well. Go back to frame 0. This is easier to do than it is to talk about the whole time and do. So I apologize if I start to sound like I'm getting winded, because I kind of am. But I am hopefully describing my process enough to where it makes sense. Okay. So that looks pretty good. I think the only thing that doesn't look good to me is the curve on this collar. Just make it a little bit more. There we go. Okay. So I think that looks pretty good. I'm going to go back to the main line. So now we're going to do one of the parts that I think is really cool, which is the squash and stretch. It actually adds a lot to the body. And it's so easy to do in Moho. So if you go to bone constraints with those 2 bones selected, I have them 2 selected, you can turn on your squash and stretch scaling. And that's pretty much it. Everything, because of how I have it bound, will now move really organically and very nicely. So I'm going to go back to my squash and stretch. I'm going to create that new action. And again, I'm going to have it going both ways. So I'll start with my squash. I actually have this labeled wrong. I'm going to fix this label because my stretch usually goes left. So even though it says squash going to the left there, I'm going to actually create this as my stretch first. Control-Shift-A, Control-1. And then to create that stretch, all you're going to do is you're going to select those 2 bones, hit T on the keyboard for your transform bone tool, hit Alt, and then left click and drag. And again, you can exaggerate this as much as you want. I think that looks pretty good. Control-Shift-A, Control-1. And that's it. So that's the stretch. And before I go any further, just going to rename this. Okay, so I renamed it here, and I also need to make sure that it's renamed in my action. So now those 2 bones are still connected. If they were named differently from my bone group and the action, they'll be disconnected. So again, with that bone selected, I'm on my bone group layer. I'm going to create my new bone action, and it'll call it squash stretch 2. Go to frame 24, set that over there, Control-Shift-A, Control-1. And now I'm going to squash it, same way, but just going the opposite direction. So you can go as exaggerated as you want. I just need to go probably about there. The one thing to note is his body, when it squashes, is actually raising up. So if you wanted to, you don't have to do this, but if you wanted to, you could counter this by moving like a body bone down. Not his root bone, but like this body bone right here. So I'm going to use the bottom of my workspace here as like a visual reference. Oops, sorry, I'm looking at the wrong thing. So right here for the bottom of his pants, as he moves down, his pants are moving up. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to offset that to keep that roughly in the same place. So it'll be something like that. And then again, I need to make sure that I'm making that linear. So there we go. So everything's still maintaining, it's still maintaining volume, but it's also not moving from that position. The other thing that I would recommend doing actually is if I go back to my stretch, when it stretches out, I actually like to move my bones in just a little bit on the arms. Because if I was to create a really extreme stretch, you'll see here that the arms become disconnected. But this also kind of happens too on stretches when you have other parts animated. And it's kind of hard to see right now, but if I move these arms in just a little bit, that'll kind of guarantee that I don't have to animate those arms every time I do a stretch in the actual animation. Okay, so something like that I think looks good. I could use that visual reference thing that I showed where I hit home and then I flip it. So I could see that the right arm could be just moved out a little bit more. And I could do that using my positioning. Since everything is perfectly in the middle, I could use that for reference. So it's 0.3096. Just copy and paste that value. So I can take that value, paste it. Oh, that's interesting. So when I'm pasting X, it's actually moving up the Y. So let me try. I don't know why that is. Oh, I moved the rotation of the bone. So remember that I moved it from here to here. So technically, when it was here, this is X. So this is X now because it's going based off of the local position of the bone. So I just learned that. I just figured that out just now. So I'm going to take this Y position. I'm going to paste that value into this arm. And then right now it's on the positive side. So I'm just going to add a negative to move that back over. And now I'll have that perfect symmetry for those arms as they're moving in on that stretch. Again, that's probably a little bit overkill, but at least you have that for reference. So I'm going to go back to my main line. And again, I'm just going to test these out. So now I have a few different things. I have my body tilt with my body turn, so I can move that both ways. Okay, and I can see that the collar is getting a little the tie is getting a little disconnected from the collar. And that's probably because of the curvature that I created. Go back to the body turn and just make sure that I move that turn with it because it was bending here and it needs to bend in the middle with this collar. Hit Control-Shift-A, Control-1. Okay, so there we go. Now that's working as it should. And then I have my squash stretch, which is also working nicely. And like I said, the arms, they are staying intact, which is great because I'm using that stretch just to move them in. And there we go. So the last two bones are going to be the blink. And because I have the eyes on the same layer as the face, I'm just going to do point animation, which is really easy. So I'm going to make sure I have that bone selected. Go to new action, blink. Go to frame 24. And I'm just going to come in here to the eye. And I'm going to move that down to about there. Move that in. Just adjust these points really quick. Okay, so something like that. Hit Control-Shift-I, Control-1. I didn't do the same thing for this bone, so let me do that. Control-Shift-A. I said Control-Shift-I, Control-1. And I'm going to do the same thing for the eye on the opposite side. Okay, the design doesn't have to be perfect. It's just enough to sell that his eyes are being closed. So that looks pretty good to me. Control-Shift-A, Control-1. So that's a very simple animation for an eye blink. So there you go. And then the last thing is the smile frown. It's already at a smile, so I'm just going to move it into a frown. So it's just going to go here. And I'm going to select these, move that up, move that down. Okay, so something like that. Go back to my main line. Cool, so now everything should be good. I'm just gonna create another quick character test positioning just to make sure this is all working nicely. So I got my body turn. My ears are still working pretty good. Let's see, squash, stretch. Let's put it into a stretch. Stretch his legs out. Maybe move his leg like that. So it looks like he's dancing. He's blinking and he's frowning. So yeah, everything is working good there, which is great. So cool. Now we are ready to move on to animation. So we'll do that next. In this section, we're getting to the best part. I'll be honest, animation is the hardest thing to teach unless it's step-by-step and pre-planned. A lot of it comes down to trial and error, and that's exactly what you'll see. My full process for animating characters. First, I'll establish my key story poses. Then I'll set the timing and spacing for the animation. Next, I'll show you how to animate on ones or twos for a smoother or a more traditional look. From there, I'll go through the animation in passes, focusing on different parts of the body. Then, I'll use the motion graph to refine the timing and spacing of certain actions. By the end, you'll have a clear understanding of how character animation works in Moho. Let's get started. So one of the first things I like to do before animating is setting up my workspace for animation. So I'm going to make sure that my default interpolation is going to be set to smooth. And then what I like to do is I come over here to the intervals displayed, and I set this to 2. And what this will do, it'll give me from this frame that I'm starting on, it's going to give me markers every other frame. And what this will do is help keep my keys clean. And something that I'll actually do, just so that it matches frame 1, if you're matching from frame 1, is I will start my animation on frame 25 at 24 frames per second, okay? And then I'm gonna give myself an end time of probably like 150. This will constantly adjust as I adjust my keyframes. And then I'm gonna have my actions panel and my layers panel. And then right here on the side, I have my keyframe docked. So this is usually on by default, but if not, it's right here. So you're gonna go to your keyframe, check that on, and make sure it's docked. Okay, so the first thing I do is I hit Control F. That's the same as if you go to Bone and you go to freeze visible bones. That's also this button right here, the freeze visible points bones, but I like to use the keyboard shortcut. And the first thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna create my first pose. So the animation is very simple. It's gonna be the character starting out sad, and then let's say he gets an idea or something and he gets excited about it. So that'll be it for the animation. So I'm gonna start out with him sad, and then that will be the first pose. And then the second pose is he's gonna be even more sad. So I'm gonna have him kind of sink down, put his shoulders down, have him tilt forward, maybe even have his ears go down. That might be cool, but I'll leave that for one of the other animation passes. Right now, we're just gonna block out just kind of a main general pose for this character, and just to see if it works. And I'll also give him a little bit of squash. And I think that looks good. So I'm gonna hit Control F to freeze that pose. And then I'm gonna come into the next pose, and it's gonna be him perking up a little bit, because now he's got an idea. And I'm gonna move this bone up just a little bit, and maybe his expression changes just a little bit, and then maybe comes up a little. Okay, so I'm actually gonna go back to this first pose here, because to make that more expressive, I'm gonna have his eyes closed. So he's gonna have his eyes open, close, and then he's gonna pop up a little bit with his eyes open again. I hit Control F. So now I'm just gonna go through with my arrow keys, and I'm just gonna see, okay, is there enough change there in those expressions? And so far, I think that looks pretty good. You could honestly spend a ton of time just creating your poses. But what I wanna quickly do is just start getting to the timing, and just to see if they work. It's a lot easier for me to see once I kind of have it blocked out and things moving, to see if these poses are even working. And then from there, I'll modify my poses even more. So I'm gonna go to the next frame after that, and it's gonna be a huge contrast from this pose, because his body's gonna be tilted up, he's gonna be stretched up, his body turn is gonna be off to the side there, and he's gonna have a smile on his face. And then we're gonna do some changes to his body, so he's leaning forward a little bit. So he's very excited. His arm is up. And this arm that I'm using right here, this is just a placeholder, because I'm gonna use the Vitruvian bone at the end to switch that arm. But we got something like this. Let's take this bone right here and let's reset that, okay? And then let's take his body and let's actually squish it down a little bit. And let's do something like a pose, a hero pose. Okay, so he's got this really great idea, and he's in this pose all excited about it. Okay, so something like that. So I'm gonna hit Control F. Okay, so now I'm gonna zoom in on my timeline so you can see my keys a little bit better. And I'm just gonna kind of toggle through these positions here. And I'm gonna go ahead and turn off my bones really quick. Yeah, I'm kind of liking the way that looks. Okay, so let's say those are my key poses. So these are the key storytelling poses that are telling the story of this character. So I'm going to use the color that I usually use to mark these keys, and that'll be green. So now what I'll do is I'm going to drag these out on my timeline. Right now, I have to get a feel for the timing of this, because if I play this out, you're going to get, you know, that typical smooth as you were first animating in Moho, or, you know, just in animating in general with tweening animation software. You just get that very slow, floaty pose to pose. So what we want to do is we want to hold our poses to see what the timing's like. So what I'll do is I'll create hold keys so you can see which keys are being held. I usually don't do these like in my own personal workflow, but for visuals, you can see what poses are being held. So I'm going to go ahead and hit play. Okay, so he's going down into this pose. And I like that. I think I like the timing, like how it is, because it's very subtle. He's just sad. He's just sinking into his sadness there. And then he's going to hold this position for a certain amount of time. And then he'll perk up. Okay, so that perk up, I want that to happen a lot sooner. And notice that I'm having these keys on odd frames, and this is just going to keep my workflow very clean. And also the nice thing about this is if I wanted to change this to twos, it's really easy because it's on keyframes which twos use. So every other frame. Okay, so let's take a look at just this part right here. Okay, so he pops up. And let me go ahead and put a hold on this. So to put a hold, what I'm doing is I'm holding Alt and left click and dragging. So I'm selecting the keys, Alt, left click, drag. And then you can also change your interval right here on the side if you wanted to. Okay, so I want him to hold that position a little bit longer. Okay, I like that. I like how long he's holding that position there, that pose, and then he's gonna go into this next one pretty quick. Okay, so this next one, he's just gonna kind of snap into it for now. Okay, so I'm gonna run this back and just take a look at the timing right now, just to see what I feel about it. Okay, I do like that. Let's start to work on the spacing. So now that you have a visual reference of these holds, I'm actually going to remove this hold now. So I'm just going to select these keys, and right here where it says hold duration, I'm just going to put 0. And I'm going to put where that hold was, I'm going to hit Control F, or better yet, I could just copy that same key and just paste it there. Okay. So I have that. And I'm going to do the same thing over here. I'm just going to remove that hold. And I'm going to copy that key. So now you know where those keys were. Okay, so I'm gonna hit play. Okay, because what I want to do is I want to take all of this motion right here and I want to kind of cushion it. I want to kind of ease in a little bit smoother, maybe from here to here. Well, that's probably too subtle. Maybe like from here to here. I want to really accentuate that ease. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take all of those keys on this position and I'm just going to keyframe them right here. And then what's really cool is I can then take and I can move this further up in the timeline. And if I wanted to, I can move these keys closer. So now I have all this spacing right here of this ease. So check this out. So if I hit play, okay, now it's really easing into that position. And let's grab a bone here so we can kind of see what this is doing on the motion graph. Okay. So before going from that pose without this key, I'll just delete it. It's going like this. It's having it's not really linear. It is still a smooth, an ease out, and then it's easing in. But with this added key right here, it's even more smoother. So it kind of gets to this position quicker, and then it really cushions in or eases in to that next position. So I'm going to go back out. And for me, I like the way that looks. However, I am noticing something. When it comes to your smart bones, sometimes if you have more frames for a really smooth animation than you set for your smart bone dial and your smart bone action, then you're gonna get kind of this popping here. So you can kind of see it happening, and it looks like it's happening on the squash and stretch. So what I could do is I could isolate where this is happening from. And I believe it's happening from the squash and stretch dial. So I'm gonna go ahead and mute that channel just to see if that popping is still happening. And it's not. So that tells me it's my squash and stretch that needs more keyframes. So I'm gonna go to the squash and stretch dial, and that's for the stretch. I'm gonna go to the squash, and because this is all bone animation, it's as easy as just taking these primary keys and just moving them back. Okay, so now I gave myself more keyframes there. So if I play this out, now I don't have that popping. So it looks pretty smooth. Okay. And then let's go into the next pose here. So this next pose, he pops up pretty quick. And it looks nice, but we can actually make it just a little bit more subtle. And I might need to change the timing just a bit. So I'm just gonna move these keys out to here. And I'm gonna do that same technique where I'm just gonna come in and I'm gonna create my keys. And maybe if I move them, 2 frames closer, let's see what that does. See how it gives it a little bit more of a smooth motion? And I can totally just play with the timing of this, because it's all built in now. I have my timing and spacing, and now I'm just moving my timing, which is also moving my spacing around. So maybe I can decide, hey, that looks good. I like how that looks. Okay, so let's go with that. And then let's go to this next position. So we have, it holds and then pop. It goes into this next position. What we could do here, maybe actually before we get to this position, is maybe we give it some sort of anticipation. So I like where the timing is currently. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move these keys over, and I'm just going to hit Control F right here, because I'm going to give myself enough time to maybe create some sort of anticipation. So maybe the anticipation can be he moves down, and let's fix his leg there. Okay, so I'm just using the transform bone tool and just popping that ankle the other way by clicking and dragging. So he goes down, and then maybe he moves his arm slightly over. Okay, so obviously I'm not giving myself a lot of time right here, but that's because I'm going to create a quick anticipation before the action. So just something to show that he's going to be moving into a new pose. And then his pose is this. So what I could probably do is move his body over, maybe give him a little bit of a body turn going in that direction. So now we have this. I kind of like the way that looks. But what I could do is maybe I can have him ease out of this position from where he's at currently. So he's here. So he popped his head up. Maybe he's going to ease a little bit. Ignore the ankle for now. I'll fix that in a bit. And then he's going to move into this next position. So he's going to go boop. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to bring these keys right over. Let's just see what the timing looks like there. So he's actually popping back because I had that other key. So I'm actually just going to delete that right there because I don't need that anymore because I have an anticipation now created. Actually, you know what? I'm going to put that back because what I need to do is freeze these keys just to make sure that I have all these poses down. There we go. And now I'll delete that key. Okay. I like the way that looks. It's kind of smooth, but we'll work with it. I'm actually going to move that in one more frame and just see what that looks like. Okay, I actually like the more snappier motion because that's what I want to do with this character. Is he's going to have very subtle, slow motions, and then he's going to have a snappy one. So just a really nice contrast to the animation there. Okay. So now what I want to do is I want this to kind of overshoot, but then come back just slightly on his body. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move these keys over, and I'm going to pick a position that's like really close to where he's at. And I'm going to create my keyframes just by double clicking on the timeline. And then I'm going to move these behind his body. So I'm going to move this forward. Okay, so we have that overshoot. So it overshoots and then it comes back. And I might need to make some adjustments on this because it might be coming back a little too much there. So like his foot, I actually don't want his foot to come back. So that foot keyframe right there, I'm actually just going to copy it from where it's staying and paste it. So that's going to stay where it's at. And I could actually probably smooth this out a little bit more. Let's see if I could smooth it out or if I just need to grab a new pose. Whoops. I think what I need to do is I need to grab a less, a more subtle type of pose there. So it doesn't have as much spacing. So you know what? Let's just do this one right here. I think that looks nice. So I'm going to grab these keys. I'm going to move them to the opposite side. Pull this back. Yeah, I like that more. That looks nicer. And then same thing with this foot there. I'm just going to make sure that that's planted. Oops. I'm copying from there and I'm pasting to here. And I want to do the same thing. I'm copying from there for that translation, pasting. And that one didn't move, so that one's fine. Okay, so now we have a slight overshoot, but then it's coming back on his body there. And I think that looks nice. It's subtle enough that you know that from that quick movement, so now we know from that quick movement, there's like a reaction to that movement. It's not necessarily a robot. Okay, so now I'm going to play this back and just take a look to see what this looks like. Okay, I think all this movement here can be just a tad bit quicker, at least for these poses here. I'll leave this where it's at. Actually, check that out. I didn't even have it on an odd frame. I'm going to move this back to here and just see what that looks like. Okay, I kind of like how that looks. I think I could probably move these keys a little bit closer. Okay, yeah, I like how that looks. Now let's watch this back again one more time. Okay, so now that I'm looking at this is happening a little too slow. So I'm going to bring this key in just a little bit more. Yeah, I think that looks good. Now I'm going to start adding some offsets or some overlapping actions to the character. So as he's going down, rather than having everything just happen all at the same time, let's see, like for his eyes, I'm going to have his eyes stay open. So I'm going to grab that rotation keyframe for that smartphone dial, and I'm going to have it paste it here. And then I'll move when his eyes close to this frame here. Let's just see what that looks like. Okay, so I think that looks okay. Maybe I can make it just a little bit faster. And maybe move them both up just a little bit in time. Okay, I think that looks okay for now. Now the other thing is his shoulders are supposed to be drooping. And again, you can't really tell because it's all happening at once. So let's see what happens, what that looks like when I offset his shoulder droop. So just by taking these keys and just by moving them forward. And then I have to paste this key. Whoops. I'm going to make sure that that's on an odd number there. And then I'm going to paste this key back to frame 25 because it's it's doing a tween from that position to there. So I want to be able to hold this position. Let's go ahead and paste that. Let's go ahead and play that. Okay, so it's not actually something that you can really notice. So let's move these keys around and just see. Actually, you know what? Did I pull his shoulders down? I could have swore I did. I'm going to check my motion graph because it's very subtle and I can't see anything. Okay, so I did pull his shoulders down. And then it looks like they come down a little bit more there. But it's very subtle. See, here's the shoulder right here. So let me... I wish I could do two at the same time. So I'm just going to move the one bone. And I'm just going to see what it looks like. Okay, so I want to make sure that I have that keyframe there pasted to there. And held. Okay, so I actually want to make sure that I'm going to paste it to the right frame so that it's going to hold there. So then when he moves back up, maybe it doesn't need to be so much there. Okay. So before he, let's see, before he moves his arm up, his arm is still down. So I'll move these keys so that all of that stays where it's at. And then he moves up. His arm is still going to be down. And then he moves his arm. And then it moves into position there. So let's just see what that looks like. Oh, move my keyboard shortcuts a little bit there. Okay, I kind of like how that looks. What I'll do though is I'm just gonna change the timing just slightly. And to do this is actually easier to do it back on the main timeline. So I'm just gonna move it over to here. Right about there. Okay, I like how that looks. So what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna match that. I'm gonna use the top of my window right here just for visual reference as far as where to put that. Actually, you know what? Let's use, oh, I just noticed that his arms aren't exactly the same because this bone is just slightly more higher. So when I put his arms down, they're actually not matching. So let's fix that. Let's just put that up. And then obviously that's where that change will be more noticeable. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the keyframe change that I just made, and before it gets to this position here, I'm just going to make sure to delete all of those. Actually, I can delete all these keys for that shoulder. And then I'm going to take that position and I'm going to move it up. Okay. So technically it's still in that position. So that just kind of gives me a point of reference. And then this right here, this is where I'm going to be bringing down his arm. So it looks like there. Okay. And then I'm going to paste that. So now it's going to where it needs to go. Okay. So that part is that's like very subtle, but let's see if it does anything. I don't want to spend too much time on doing things that are probably not going to be able to be seen. Yeah, I think that helps. It helps especially with making his body look like it's leaning forward a lot more. Okay, and then maybe maybe he picks up his shoulders just a little bit. Maybe that might look nice. Okay, so I have his shoulder keyed right there. But maybe right here, I can just pick him up just a tiny bit. Let's see what that looks like. Yeah, and then you can see that they're going back down from here. So I just need to make sure to have that key for that same position there. Okay. And maybe when he picks up his shoulders, maybe instead of like just having them straight as they are, maybe I can have his arms just slightly come in just a little bit. Let's see what that looks like. Yeah, I like how that looks. Okay, so I'm going to take those keys and I'm going to paste it onto this frame here. So then when he goes to move into his anticipation, his arms are already there. Okay, I think that looks pretty good. So let's go ahead and let's hit play. Okay. For the mouth position, so now from this position here to him going up, maybe I can just offset that animation 2 frames. See what that looks like. Okay, so it's a little bit more noticeable. So that's the last thing that's moving. So that's probably going to be the last thing that you'll see is that mouth. Kind of the eyes and the mouth are moving at the same time. So let me just move the mouth back even further. Okay, so now that I've done that, now it looks like I need to change my timing a little bit because now I don't have enough time to register that his mouth changed. So this is where I'm going to start to move my keys back a little bit. So notice that my timeline is growing and it can grow the other way too. So that's why I have that padding right there in case I need to make any timing adjustments before the animation starts. Okay, so I'm going to hit play again. I'm going to play this out. Okay, and with that motion, maybe I can get into that a little bit more smoother than it is currently. So I'm going to do the same technique where I'm going to just kind of ease into it a little bit more smoother. And I might not have enough frames with this smartphone dial to be able to do that. Okay, I'm just going to change the timing on that a little bit more. Okay, I think that looks okay. I'm not a big fan of it, but I think that does kind of convey, maybe I'll have it just a little bit sooner. I think that does convey the emotional change. Okay, so I think that looks good. And then for that timing afterwards, maybe it's a little bit too much there. There we go. I think that works. All right, and then as he's going into this next pose here, let's go ahead and let's close his eyes again. And then we'll close his eyes and then they'll open. So right here, they will be open. Go ahead and hit play. Okay. I kind of like the way that looks. Yeah, I think that looks okay. All right. So now let's see if there's anything else I can do. So I'm kind of going through my passes. So I started out blocking everything, getting the timing, and then I started going through on, like my first pass, and I was just looking at his limbs. And then the second pass, I actually lost track, but I'm kind of like looking at like the overlapping actions of everything and seeing what I can offset to make things look a little bit more interesting. Like here, maybe what I could do, I don't know what this will look like. I don't think it'll look very nice, but as an example, I can offset his squash and stretch. So the squash, I remember that I padded it, but what if I just offset that even more? So I'm going to put this over here. It might look like he's deflating. That doesn't look too bad. But I think it does kind of conflict with the body tilt. I think it looks a little off with that body tilt. Let me just move it over here and just see what that looks like. Yeah, it's so subtle. I mean, honestly, you don't really notice it. So it's one of those things where it's like, okay, that's too subtle to where it's not really worth spending a lot of time on. Okay, so the part that I think I do really want to focus on now is how is he getting to this position? Right, so we have his legs going down, but does that work? I think it kind of does. I think what I'd like to do though is in this position here, I want to maybe just step his leg forward just a little bit. Maybe we see what that is. So right here, right now it's going to slide and then it'll slide back. So let me paste that key back to there. But I kind of like that, but I would like it like as if maybe here as he's going into this down position. So he's going down. Maybe he's kind of like stepping out. So I have that very subtle. Okay, and until he steps down, and it feels very long as far as that step. So what I'll do is I'll move this maybe what I'll do is I'll keep this closer to the original position. So I'm gonna turn my onion skins on at this point to kind of see a little bit better. I have my outlines on. Let's go ahead and turn my color fills. And then I have my relative keyframes off and my selected layer only off. So I'm just gonna use this to kind of get an idea. Let's turn that off. I don't like the color fills. Yeah, I think that looks okay. And I'll do a draw behind. So my onion skins are behind my character. I just want to take a look at where I'm going to and from. So I'm just going to favor that first pose. So he will be picking up his leg. But I want to look like he's going a little bit faster. Because what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this position here. And it won't move until this foot is planted. Yeah, so I think what I'll do, so this position, for these keys, I'm going to move that over. So that leg is there. Whoops. Let's offset that a little bit more. Okay, let's just see what that looks like. I don't think it's going to have enough vertical movement on the root bone to make that look good. Yeah, you know what? I think that looks kind of okay. It's just the timing. The timing's a little tricky because I'm putting everything on every other frame. I think for how snappy I want this part to be, it's going to be really hard to do on twos. And maybe I want this. Maybe, yeah, I think I want him to come up a little bit on this step. So he's going to be kind of like pushing off and then going down. Okay, let's see what that looks like in real time. Yeah, I think that looks a little bit better. So now it kind of looks like he's stepping out. I still don't like the timing on this foot. So let me see if I can do anything with that to make that a little bit. So just going to there. And then I don't know what this key is doing, so I'm just going to delete that. And then let me look at this frame one more time. Yeah, it would almost look good, I think, if I just did this. Yeah, it would. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to kind of fake this. I'm going to, so I can, because what I want to show is that you can also put this on twos. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to move his foot. So there to there, just a really quick action. And then that way I have enough time to make this other foot action really quick too. So there it is. It's on that frame. And now I can move those keys up, I think. Boop. Yeah. So he's kind of pushing off a little bit on the front foot to bring his back leg in, and then he's kind of resting on it. And you know what? Let's bring that down just a little bit more. I want to get some bend on that leg if I can. No, that's probably too far. Let's go up a little bit. Okay, let's just see what that looks like. Whoa, there he goes. Okay, and now what I can do is I'm going to go into the root bone for my to get an idea in terms of what my y-axis is doing. So here's the y-axis. And as you can see there, it's going, it's just there. It's what I want to do actually is I want to probably have this step down a little bit. So it's going to step down and then go up and then settle. See what that looks like. Go up and settle. I think that settle is too far down. Yeah, I think if you play it back fast, when you look at it frame by frame, it looks not right. But when you play it back fast, it's a fast motion, so I think it works. And especially once we have the overlapping action. I think that's the last thing, like the follow through with the ears, that will really tie this together. I think we're good to move on to that because the Vitruvian bone, I'm going to leave that to the end. Now we're going to go into, let's call this like the third pass because I lost track of how many passes I'm doing. So the third pass now is going to be with the ears and the overlapping actions. What I like to do at this point is basically remove all the keys besides the first and the last one, just so I don't have all these keys that I have to constantly correct. Okay, so all the keys have stayed the same. So what we could do here to make this a little bit more interesting and to really accentuate his sadness is let's bring his ears in. Okay, because he's a dog. So let's bring those ears in. Maybe that out. Okay, see what that looks like. Yeah, I think that looks okay. Okay. So now we have his ears slowly going in. So I set it to where I want it to be, but I definitely want that motion to happen a lot sooner. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to copy that keyframe and I'm going to paste it here. Okay. I like it now, like how quick it's able to get to that next position. I do want to give it a little bit more ease. So maybe from like right here, I'll take that. Maybe move that in a little bit quicker. So he's going to get to that position sooner with his ears, and then it'll just kind of slowly ease. And you know what? There's probably... You can see the spacing between these. You know what? Let's just open up the motion graph because that's the easiest way to see spacing. So you can see the spacing here. So it is going from there and then down. And then obviously when he pops back up, his ears are going to be back up. But from here to here, you can see there's that very, very subtle ease going on. And I think that looks nice. But what I want to do as well is to show that his ears are heavy. So what I could do is I could add some drag to these ears. So as these ears are going in, let's see how fast they're going in so I can kind of get an idea. Okay. I'm just going to add a little bit of drag as those ears are going in. So these, the top part of the ear, that's what's moving, but this part is kind of dragging behind. Okay, and there's gonna be a pop there because I have some conflicting keyframes right next to it, it looks like. Yep. So, yeah, let me delete this keyframe. I don't know what that is. Okay, so let's see what that looks like when I drag that even closer. Okay, so it actually has a little bit of lift, which I don't want to do that. Okay, so it's something just very, again, this is very subtle animation, very simple, subtle animation, which is honestly sometimes the hardest versus like actions. Making subtle animation can be a little tricky. And you know what? Overall, I like how it looks, but I think I want the top of his ears to come in just a little bit quicker for that cushioning. Okay, I think that looks a little bit better because what this will let me do then is I can add a little bit of overlap. So it's good. So those heavy ears are going to swing back a little bit the other way. Okay, because right now they're going in pretty slow. So let's have them go in a little bit quicker. And let's actually give it some motion to go in a little bit quicker. Okay, there we go. And then it'll bounce back just slightly going into that other position. Okay, and I just need to change the timing. I like that it goes back out, but I just need to change the timing on that. Okay, maybe even a little bit more. Okay, cool. I think that looks okay. We'll definitely come back to that, but I think right now that's looking okay. I just want to see what it's going to look like for the rest of the animation, because I want to make sure that I have yeah, I want to make sure that I have these ears, the weight matched throughout the animation. So right here, so now I'm going to have a little bit of a floating motion because his ears are going from this position. What position is it? Oh, let me actually look at something here. His ear going out and then back in. I'm going to keyframe that. Oh, I lost my keyframe. What the heck? Interesting. Okay, so it's that position there where I need to have those keyframes. So yeah, I want to make sure that I have these keyframes so that they're not moving anymore. So they're going to hold. So they did their swing, came back. They're going to hold. And then as he pops up, I think I like this position. So I'm going to keyframe this position, the rotation on the red channel. And I'll bring that closer so that it's happening a lot sooner. Okay, maybe even quicker, because now his ears, rather than them just being affected by gravity, they're actually kind of perking up because he's kind of got an idea. Okay, so I like that. And so what I'll do is I'll add just a little bit of drag on those ears. So those are going to be overlapping at the end of this motion. There we go. I think that looks good. And then I'm just going to drag out the spacing or the timing so that it slows it down a little bit. Okay. I like how that looks. All right. So again, I need to look at this a few times just to see if I got this right. Overall, I think I can make this pop up as far as him going from here to here just a little bit quicker, but it's going to be tricky with these keys that I already set. Because I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to select the ears, and I'm just going to invert that selection so I could just see on my timeline here in the red channels what are not the ears. So I know that I have like a mouth in there. So I'm going to move all this just forward just one more frame, 2 frames rather. There we go. I think that looks a little bit better. It's a little bit quicker. And the ears still have that nice overlap. Okay, I think I like that. So now we're going to move on to this next part here. So we have this animation quickly going here. But now what are we going to do with these ears? These ears are, they're just stationary. We need to give them some life now. So we have that position, and then he goes down. So let's make a subtle adjustment to those ears as it's going down. And what we'll do is before we make a change, I'm just going to come 1 frame or 2 frames sooner. I'm just going to create a key. I'll delete this last animation because that's not going to be doing anything. Okay, so he's going down. And let me just play this out just so I can kind of visually understand what I want to do here. Okay, so right here, I'm imagining that his ears are coming up. Okay, so maybe, how do I want to do this? Maybe his ears are like this. Okay, so his ears are dragging that bottom part. Oops, I don't want to mess with his head. So something like that. It's kind of what I'm imagining right now in my head. Okay, but before he moves, I don't want to have those ears moving. So I'm going to create just a frame right here, just to hold those ears down to kind of understand what I want to do there. Because what I think would look nice is to have these ears just kind of hang in the air for a little bit. So let's do that. Let's give these ears some hang time. And we'll do that by having this go down slightly, this go down slightly, and having these come up. So these parts of the ears are catching up. Okay. And then let's put these ears back down just so we can get that. Because for me, personally, it's kind of hard to see overall what this motion is going to look like until I complete the motion. Because I kind of get caught up. There we go. See how that works? So that looks nicer to kind of have those falling back down. And now I can see too, like, okay, I can actually probably keep those ears up higher for a longer period of time. So it's coming to here. Okay, I can probably push that out a little bit more. As those ears are coming back down to that position, what I could do, I'm gonna just create the rotation going this way. I'm gonna keep this position where it's at, but this rotation of them going down, I'm gonna have that offset. So it'll look like this. Okay, that's actually very slow, very floaty. So I'm gonna speed up the animation for that. Okay, I definitely need to give it some more bend because I think I lost my my bend. So I got to create some sort of in between for these to show that they still have some, they're still flopping down. Okay. And then this rotation needs to be offset a lot more. So let's come down and then it'll go into place there. I might need to have the ears again because I'm just trying to get like a really heavy, like I'm just imagining that these are heavy and that they're just kind of flapping around. So what I'll probably do is have them come up so it'll go down and then maybe they'll just come up just slightly. Okay, and then I'll have to have that bottom part of that ear offset to that animation. So it'll go up and then down and then kind of just bounce. Yeah, and then now I'm just imagining that now that these ears are just kind of flopping back out after that, after they hit. Whoops. So there. Maybe not so much. That's quite a bit. Okay, I think it's very floaty. So what I will do, I think this part on the ears, they need to come down a lot faster. So I do like the float there, but then here they can come down a lot quicker. And honestly, for this float, so it's going and it's going up and then going up again. Maybe I could have them. Maybe I can have them go up some more, just a little bit. See what that looks like. Okay, let me look at it without the bones. Okay, I kind of like how that's looking. Is go into my motion graph and just take a look and see what's happening. Because this will give me a better idea of what's happening with this motion that I'm trying to achieve. Yeah, so I think what I'll do is I'll have this go down. And again, I want to make this kind of hold, have some hang time in the air a little bit. Okay, probably not that much. I think what's going on is my timing is just a little bit off to that motion. Yeah, it looks like it is. So it almost feels like that ear should be coming up a lot sooner. Okay, I think that's what I was missing there. I think the ears are still a little bit too floaty, but at least, so obviously that ear is going down faster. Let's just kind of match it to the other ear for a second here. Okay, I think that looks okay. It's not quite the result that I was aiming for. Yeah, this ear is already going up. So let me fix this ear. I think that's, yeah, this ear shouldn't be going up yet. That's going up quite a bit. So let's go ahead and let's just bring that down. Okay, so I'm going to come back to that. Again, I don't like how slowly it's floating back down. I keep on saying I'm going to come back to it, but then I just keep on working on it. Hey, let's have, when it goes back in, let's definitely have it go in more on both sides there. And then I don't have it going back out. I want to have that motion a little bit. Okay, I'm going to leave that as it is right now because waves or follow through is kind of hard with ears like that. So I'm going to come back to that because what we're going to do now is we're going to add in that Vitruvian bone. And I'm going to go ahead and hit play. And for where that Vitruvian bone is going to switch is going to be right here. So I'm going to make sure that I have on my bone layer selected. I'm going to hit Alt-D. And there we go. Now we have that massive arm coming in, but we'll just leave it as is. And as you can see here, we have all these keys that we don't need. So I'm just going to go ahead and delete those. And then I'm going to create a keyframe. Oh, they're back again. Yeah, see, these are the ghost keys that I'm talking about. So let me delete that again. Probably didn't have them all selected. Okay, and so for these keys right here, I'm going to create my reset so I could bring in that channel. So there's that. And then I want to do the same thing as I did with like the other part of this body where I have like a slight overshoot. So this is technically the overshoot, and then there's going to be like a subtle. Okay, so let's go. Okay, let's just see what that looks like. Yep, I think that looks okay. It's a little extreme on that bottom of that arm there. Okay. Yeah, as far as matching everything else, I think that looks okay. Yeah, those ears are tricky. When I was doing my test animations for this, I was doing on ones, and then I figured, hey, it might be cool to do these on twos in case, you know, we wanted to put it on twos after. And I think that's really making those ears a little bit trickier than I was hoping. Okay, so now here's the really cool part. So I'm going to go back to frame 0, and I'm going to create a new layer, and it's going to be a frame by frame layer. And I'll call this smear because that's what we're going to do is we're going to create a smear that's inspired by this reference. So when I go to put the arm out, what I'm going to do on this frame by frame layer is before the action, which is oh yeah. Okay, because we're doing this on twos, I'm not going to be able to put my smear in between these two keyframes. So I'm going to try something that I actually haven't done before and see what this looks like. So on this frame here, I'm going to put an empty frame for my frame by frame. And then this here, I'm going to put an empty frame. And this here, I'm going to put an empty frame. And these will be empty because in the middle, that's where I'm going to have my drawing. So this pose right here, this is where I'm going to create my smear. And let's just see what this looks like because again, I'm doing it on twos, whereas I set this up to do this on ones. So I'm going to create an onion skin for his arm in that position. Let's see, which one is it? Oh yeah, let me Let me move my onion skin so it's not draw behind. And let's do outline just so I can see this. So this is where his arm is. So if I go to that position, you can see there's where his arm is. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw out with the blob brush. I have pen pressure off. I'm just using a mouse, and I'm going to put my smoothing all the way up to help me with my arc. And I'm just going to draw out that arc. And obviously that's not the color I want. So I'm going to go back to frame 0. Oops. Can I change the color on this frame? I can. Okay. I thought that'd create a keyframe for it. So now I have this arc going out. And it's going to be a little tricky because I don't have this on ones. So I'm going to be curious to see what this looks like as it is. So I'm going to hide my bones there. Yeah, see there that doesn't work. What I'll probably do, I'll make a new frame and I'll kind of draw out where that arc was before. So I'm going to use my onion skin again. And I'll just have it stop a little bit sooner. And we'll see what that looks like, because I honestly don't know at this point. I'm gonna hit play. Yeah. I think that looks okay. It doesn't look as good as it does on ones. But in a second I'll show you why we're doing this on every other frame. Because I think we could appreciate how it'll look both ways. Okay, so the one thing that I do want to fix just to finalize this is going to be the ears. What I'm going to do, just because I think I have too many frames, is I'm going to take away that floating motion on his ears. I don't think I'm going to be able to get away with that going every other frame. I think there's just too many frames to do this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring all these keys in. See, already that's looking a lot better. The motion's going in pretty quick, but I might need to adjust the spacing to fix that. Okay, and again, I think for this position here, I think I could bring these ears out a little bit more. Let's see what that looks like. I'm gonna create my start animation on this frame here, just somewhere close. So I'm gonna hit Control and left click on this blue bar. Yeah, I think I like how that looks. It's a little, again, it's a little fast coming up. So what I'll probably do is just delete this keyframe in between these ears. So from this pose to this pose to that pose, I'll probably just delete that keyframe. And then I will just make these a little higher. There we go. I think that looks better. So I can't get away with the floating motion on this because I'm animating it to go on twos while it's playing on ones. Okay, so there's that. So let's watch everything back for what it is. Okay, I think that looks pretty good. Now check this out. So I have this on ones. Let's go ahead and I'm going to copy both of these. And I'm just going to call this dog 1. And then I'm going to duplicate this for dog 2. So this is going to be on ones. This is going to be on twos. Go back to my my keys here. And I'm going to highlight all of these keys. And then I'm going to put it on interval 2. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to put them side by side. So as I play this back, now I have my animation on both 1s and 2s. And that is my animation workflow. And there you have it. There's my entire workflow on how I would design, rig, and animate this character in Moho. If you made it this far, be sure and let me know by commenting "the ultimate" down below. This has been a real labor of love, and I appreciate you watching it all the way to the end. If you want me to personally mentor you, sign up below to the waitlist. I'll see you later.